I have devices in my house that are listening to everything I say.
Oh, I was just talking to Nathaniel about how I'm totally opposed to those.
I mean, but I have them, right? They are technically listening to everything I say right now.
Mary Radcliffe has a Google Home, an Alexa, or a Siri listening to everything she says in her home.
Galen, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Google Home devices.
Oh, man.
How does this... And it's okay because it's not the government.
I mean, honestly, the truth of this is that I am so cynical about data privacy that I think it probably does not much matter.
Hello and welcome to the GD Politics Podcast. I'm Galen Greek. The way we choose our presidential nominees in America is an accident of history. Some states began hosting more open primaries dating back to the progressive era in the early 20th century, but the process was largely democratized after the disastrous Democratic National Convention in Chicago in 1968. No one ever really intended for Iowa and New Hampshire to have so much sway, but once the process opened up and Jimmy Carter launched his career by camping out in Iowa ahead of the 1976 caucuses, building momentum in the early states became key to winning a presidential nomination. Some would argue the whole process is a little nonsensical, or at least unfair. Why give so much power to a handful of states? Why not have everyone vote at the same time, or at least have groups of states vote at the same time? Also, what's so bad about a party convention where the nominees are chosen to begin with? That's closer to how almost every other democracy in the world chooses its candidates. Well, in 2028, the process is getting shaken up again, just not the way any of those reforms would suggest. The early states will keep their outsized power, but Democrats are reshuffling which states get the privilege. According to a calendar newly proposed by the DNC, 6 states will get to weigh in before Super Tuesday, which is the earliest date any other states will be allowed to weigh in. In the order they were proposed, those states are South Carolina, Nevada, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Michigan, and Virginia. Iowa has been ousted from the lineup altogether, and South Carolina and Nevada have been placed ahead of New Hampshire, the historical first in the nation. To mark the occasion, we are going to host our first ever primary calendar draft. If some states are going to vote first, which ones should they be? So joining me for this very nerdy and hopefully also fun game are Nathaniel Rakich and Mary Radcliffe. Nathaniel and Mary, welcome to the podcast. Are you ready?
Yeah, this will be fun.
So ready. This is like a combination of our presidential primary drafts, but also the old game that we did at 538 every few months, which was like, which state is the best, which always created the most infuriating arguments in the newsroom.
Okay, really quick, which state is the best?
So I think my answer has changed. I argued at the time Vermont, but I think now I'm going to go with Maine because I've become more of an ocean guy.
Okay.
Are you the arbiter of this because you don't live in a state?
That should be.
Harsh.
Yeah.
Okay, so
because the
Maine,
rest of us are biased, I guess.
I mean, I'm biased too, but I got to remove my Massachusetts
Boston boy
bias.
picks Maine. That's kind of biased anyway. Maine is genuinely a good choice.
I know, right?
I approve. Mary, best state.
Best state, just in general? There's so many elements here.
That's why it's hard. That's why it's fun.
Mary's too open-minded. She's not partisan enough. You need to just say Michigan or Pennsylvania.
What I want to say is going to get me destroyed by all the Michiganders out there, but I actually kind of want to say Ohio.
Oh.
Yeah, that's really out of left field.
Okay, no, here's the thing. There's a lot of Pennsylvania has that too. All 3 of these states have a lot of really great outdoorsy stuff that I love.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Ohio has
Maine.
Far less diverse terrain than Michigan.
That's true.
Or Pennsylvania.
And Michigan has big water.
Big water.
I miss big water. I haven't lived near big water since I left Seattle, and I miss it a lot.
The east coast of Lake Michigan is fucking beautiful.
I know.
I was just there.
I went to college on the western side of the state, and we used to just go hang out on the dunes all the time.
Okay, so are you choosing? It sounds like you've changed.
Maybe
your mind
I have to change to Michigan, even though I don't live there anymore.
If I'm not allowed to choose the state that I live in, which is New York, obviously the best state. I mean, upstate New York, fantastic. The city, all kinds of, you have access to whatever you need, blah, 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 blah. My second favorite state, which is maybe a more interesting choice, is
Texas.
Texas. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I love Texas.
We know your Texas superiority, Galen.
Not enough snow.
Even
Okay.
I think New York is better than Texas, which should tell you exactly what I think about Texas.
So I think Texas is the only other state in the union that has a New York style sense of itself, which is like
Arrogant and obnoxious?
no, like an enthusiasm about being what it is, right? Like anybody can be a Texan. You go there, you get into the music, culture, food. There's just the sports teams. There's just a strong sense of identity that you can be like enthusiastic to be a part of. And it extends beyond just the NCAA or whatever it may be that, yes, certainly exists in the upper Midwest. And also, by the way, I love the upper Midwest. But I think Texas has a strong sense of itself. It has, a booming economy. It has really good food. I think the people are pretty friendly. Yeah. So that's what I'll say about that.
All right. Not to go on too much of a tangent here, but I think we talked about this poll on either GD Politics or 538, but YouGov did a poll about whether people feel like most proud of their country, their state, or their city. And the most proud of their states, do you guys want to guess?
Texas and New York? I don't know. That's kind of already my guess.
No. Minnesota and Michigan.
Huh.
So I actually
Okay.
think that the idea that certainly I think there's obviously Texas is Texas pride and everybody does the flag and the boots and everything like that. But I think the idea that, Texas and New York have a monopoly on state pride and state identity is very false.
Okay. All right. I have been fact checked. This is the beauty of data. You can find out in real time when your dear host is totally wrong. Okay, let's get to the matter.
The actual topic
hand.
of this
Yeah, the actual
podcast.
topic at hand. So we are going to do a draft, and I turned to random.org in order to help us. I did not want this lineup the way it turned out, but random.org chose it. So it's Galen, Mary, and then Nathaniel. We're going to do a snake draft. So Nathaniel, you'll get to choose 2 states in a row. But before we get to that, what do you make of this newly proposed calendar? Is New Hampshire going to roll over and let this happen? Why is there no Iowa? Will they be able to actually coordinate across the states in such a way that they get this desired calendar? Nathaniel, why don't you go first as the New Hampshire defender amongst us?
Galen, you really have me pegged. All right. Well, for the reason that Iowa isn't there is that Iowa done fucked up in 2020, and they
didn't do much
had
better in 2024.
Well, they were demoted in 2024. It all stems from 2020. Although, so obviously, folks might remember there was the glitchy reporting system with the Iowa caucuses, and we didn't get results for 24 hours, and it was just a huge debacle, and it embarrassed the DNC and embarrassed Iowa, and so I think that was the catalyst for all of this, but conversations about Iowa and New Hampshire not being representative of the Democratic Party in particular, but also the country, especially with regard to race and stuff like that, that had been percolating for a while. I think there were a lot of states that were happy to kind of shiv Iowa when it was down. And so I think that was kind of the excuse that people took to boot Iowa out of the lineup. Plus, obviously, Iowa has kind of moved off the map, right? I think that there is a thought that, you want to have this really involved organizing thing going on in a state that you can be competitive in the general election, and Iowa just hasn't been that way, although I think 2026 is interesting in that regard because I think Rob Sand has a pretty decent chance of being elected governor, but obviously these decisions will be made by then. Yeah, so I don't think New Hampshire is going to roll over. They are, as you mentioned, Galen, very proud of the fact that they have been the first in the nation primary state for about 100 years. They did this in 2024 where they were told, hey, you're not going to go first anymore. And they were like, bite me. And they moved up their date to be first. It should be noted that under state law in New Hampshire, they have to be the first primary. And obviously that's kind of an unenforceable law because they can't control what other states do. But what happened in 2024 was that it cost them their delegates, and at least initially, and they had basically a beauty contest where they voted, but it wasn't actually worth anything technically, but it was worth something in terms of media exposure, which of course is really what these things are about. And then they did this sneaky little thing later where they had a small gathering of party insiders, and they called that the primary, and then New Hampshire got their delegates back, and it was a whole corrupt thing, and not corrupt, I shouldn't say corrupt, but it was a whole kind of backroom deal slimy thing. But yeah, I think that New Hampshire is going to do the same thing, and they're they're gonna move themselves up to, or mid to early January.
There's not much space to move up to, though, right? If I recall the proposed calendar, isn't the first
South
primary
Carolina
quite
is
early?
January 22, but
Okay, all right.
we've
So
had
there's some time.
back in 2008, I believe, the Iowa caucuses were like January 3rd. So there is time. These places can go, they are not ashamed to go very early. I'm always curious, is this the year that we're going to get like our first like December primary or caucus? And probably not, but it could happen.
We should also mention here that the Democratic Party is constrained by how the states run their primaries internally. So in some states, the state party can just decide when it wants to place its primary on the calendar. In other states where the state itself runs the primary, if Republicans, for example, control the state legislature or the governor's mansion, the Democratic Party can't all by itself move the actual date of the contest. So the Democratic Party is constrained by some of those rules and regulations. We on this podcast are not. So this is going to be our sort of magic wand version of the Democratic calendar lineup. In the future, we will do a Republican calendar, but for this very moment, the Democratic Party seems to be engaged in this fight. One thing that I'm thinking about here in terms of whether or not New Hampshire rolls over, whether or not all the states play by the rules, the Democratic Party has levied higher sort of penalties this time around than it did in 2024 for abiding by the rules. This time around, if you don't abide by the rules, you lose 100% of your delegates as opposed to 50% of your delegates. There's a multiple $100,000 fine levied on the state. But I've heard rumblings that the Democratic National Party is so broke, Ken Martin is so unpopular that under the current scheme, maybe a lot of the candidates won't give a shit what the National Democratic Party has to say. And in some ways, it could even create this anti-establishment, anti-elitist vibe if you say, well, screw the Democratic Party. I'm going to, I'm going to go to New Hampshire. I'm going to go campaign in New Hampshire ahead of whatever the South Carolina primary.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the stakes are really different in a 2028 primary compared to a 2024 primary. Because in the 2024 primary, this was before Joe Biden had dropped out of the race. This was basically Joe Biden against nobody. I'm sorry, Dean Phillips, right? Like there was no contest to be had. And so I think states were perhaps a little bit more willing to do that silly things like New Hampshire did, where they moved their primary and they're like, we don't care about the delegates. This is our thing.
Right.
Whereas in 2028, this is a much more significant contest. We don't know yet how many candidates will be running, but I suspect quite a lot. There's more incentive to ensure that your state gets its voice heard, I think, in a contested primary than in one that's basically just like going to coronate the sitting president.
I think we're going to get into this, but it is worth saying here, perhaps ironically, that South Carolina, which has been moved to the front of the pack, is less representative of the Democratic electorate than either New Hampshire or Iowa, which, I guess is ironic. But like part of what the Democratic Party was doing here, I guess, is trying to say we want to reward certain parts of the electorate, whether you think that's legitimate or not, whether that's how a primary calendar is meant to work. Donna Brazile, for example, at the rules meeting where they decided this, made an argument for, Black voters are the most reliable Democratic voters in the country. They ought to have the first say in South Carolina. So there's some interesting different politics being played here, incentives going on here, which I think we will lay bare how we actually think those incentives should be structured as we get into this draft. So are we ready?
Yeah, can I just say one more thing, though?
Yeah.
This is, I think, what's ironic about putting South Carolina first is I actually think it takes some power away from the voters of South Carolina.
Yep.
Right? The first few nominating contests are like, you're going to have this big candidate field. Maybe there's 20 candidates, and you're sort of culling down. You get a few of them drop out after each contest, and then whoever's third or fourth gets to play cleanup, right? Jim Clyburn, representative from South Carolina, longtime representative from South Carolina, said pretty much the same thing, with some baseball analogy that I bet Nathaniel knows and I don't remember because I don't know baseball. And so, like, it might feel like you're rewarding South Carolina, but it, like, practically speaking, has the opposite impact.
I think that's a really good point. And I saw an insightful tweet from our friend Jacob Urbashkin, who made the point, was responding to the idea that like Pete Buttigieg might not like this new order because it starts with South Carolina, and he tends to, or at least in 2020, he struggled with black voters. But I think Jacob made a good point, which is that like basically like Buttigieg can, kind of like all he has to do is kind of like survive, get through South Carolina. And if he gets 15% in South Carolina, that certainly wouldn't have been enough to win it under the old regime, but like it's enough for like second or third place maybe now. And then he moves on to a place like New Hampshire where he can do really well. Like, I don't know, it actually could work out for him. So yeah, I think these states have different roles now. And it's
also,
not necessarily more
Nathaniel,
or less influence.
For what it's worth, this is a real throwback, but I was in South Carolina for that primary in 2020 and actually interviewed Jim Clyburn, who was at the time the majority whip. His nephew was working on Pete Buttigieg's campaign. And when I asked him, like, he was trying to like hide, like, we all knew he was endorsing Joe Biden, but this was like 2 days before he did it, and he was kind of trying to hide the ball. He's like, oh yeah, I'm still open to like various other people. And I was like, okay, yeah, who? Name them. And he said Amy Klobuchar and Pete Buttigieg. So I think that yes, it is what is your relationship like with black voters in the Democratic Party, but it's also what is your relationship like with the establishment, because black voters are also tend to be, especially older black voters who vote the most in primaries, tend to be more aligned with the establishment. And so there's a racial component here. There is also like a Democratic Party sectoral debate component here as well. Okay, shall we go? Shall we do this? Is everyone ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, so I am going first begrudgingly, and I am going to choose Nevada. So not that far off from what the Democratic Party itself chose. Nevada goes second in its scheme for a couple reasons. As we go through this, you'll see this trend, but I am trying to prioritize the competitiveness of the state in a general election, how representative the state is of the Democratic Party, and the size of the state. And that's for a few reasons. So one, if you have a primary early on in a really big state like New York, New Jersey, even say maybe Pennsylvania or Texas, the media market is so expensive that you really make it difficult for dark horse candidates to break through, or candidates who just don't have lavish funding out of the gate. And I think we have seen that the best funded candidates are not necessarily always the strongest. Like Michael Bloomberg spent, $1 billion on his campaign in 2020. If he had sort of plopped down in Pennsylvania or California or what have you, you can move the needle a lot more with dollars. Also, I think there is something kind of romantic about the, kissing babies, shaking hands, pressing the flesh vibe of a primary state. Nevada is a state with 3.2 million people, which is really not all that much. I'm already going long here, but in terms of the competitiveness and representativeness of the party, the places where Nevada over-indexes compared to the party as a whole are areas where the Democratic Party really needs to figure its shit out. It over-indexes on white voters without a college degree, so it's a very working-class state. It is also an extremely competitive state. Democrats had been winning it for a while. Trump obviously won it narrowly in 2024, and so you would think that the Democratic Party would want to incentivize its candidates to be able to relate to non-college educated voters across the board, over indexes with non-college educated white voters. But there's also a very large Latino population in Nevada, a very large labor population within Nevada. Unions are very strong there. If Democrats want to become this more economically populist, more labor-aligned party, maybe that's a good way to do it as well. And so, I understand that Las Vegas is a bit of an expensive media market, and that is where most of the people are concentrated. But you can still go to Reno. You can still get on the airwaves in Las Vegas and ex-urban Las Vegas without spending $1 bajillion. So that is why my first draft pick is Nevada.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if we are being kind of like objective about it, which, of course I will not be, but if we are being objective about it, I think that Nevada is pretty clearly the best choice. So back in 2019, our former 538 colleague Jeffrey Skelly did an analysis of which states were the most representative of the Democratic electorate. Nevada was ranked 5th overall and was the highest ranking small state. And I completely agree with Galen in terms of the value of retail politics. I think, especially in a presidential primary, you want to give a candidate, like somebody who maybe doesn't go in as the front runner or with a lot of money, you want to give that person a chance to genuinely connect with the voters and kind of, do a surprising, thing like Jimmy Carter did in Iowa. And I think a small state provides for that. So I think that Nevada is the perfect combination of small and representative. So well done, Galen.
Thank
Great
you.
pick.
I'll just say here as a baseline so we can get a sense of how our states compare as we go through them. Broadly speaking, the Democratic electorate in a presidential primary campaign is 60% white, 20% black, 10% Latino, 10% other. So that's, Asian, Native American, what have you, mixed race, etc. And so when we're comparing these different states to the baseline, that's what we're comparing it to. And in general, there are far more people without a college degree than with a college degree in the United States. It's somewhere like 37% of Americans have a college degree.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to people who are voting in primaries, it's a bit more split. It's closer to 50-50 because people with college degrees tend to vote at a higher rate. So just to set that baseline. And now, Mary, it's up to you.
Yeah. So I had what I was thinking about was along the same lines as you for the first state, Galen. I agree that we probably should have a smaller state as the first state so that candidates have the opportunity to talk to voters. And I agree with the money piece of this, right? We don't want to choose a state that's going to have a really expensive media market where only candidates that have a ton of money are going to be able to compete. This is the first state we want to have, should be a state where people can come out of nowhere off the wall and make their case to voters and let the voters actually make those decisions. But the other piece that I was thinking about is for my first state, I want there to be some ideological diversity in the Democratic Party in that state. I want there to be representation of, for the simplicity of this discussion, the progressive lane and the establishment lane. I want both of those to be present in that first state because candidates on both sides of that intra-party divide should be having an opportunity to make a case to voters that would be interested in them so that both sides of that divide have the opportunity to winnow the field. And so I have decided.
Wait, hold on. Before you say it, Nathaniel, can you guess which state Mary is going to say based off of the criteria she just mentioned?
I mean, nothing.
I think she's going to say Michigan.
No, Michigan's too big.
It's too big.
Oh, then she might say New Hampshire. That would be real contrarian.
I think I don't truly know, but I'm gonna maybe say Wisconsin.
That would be a very good pick, but okay, Mary, go ahead. That's the end of today's preview. Head to gdpolitics.com to become a paid subscriber and catch the full episode. Mary, Nathaniel, and I spent a little over an hour drafting Democratic presidential primary states, and it was honestly pretty fun. We debated the value of the size of a state, the role it plays in the general election, and its representativeness of the party. We also talked about regional diversity, ideological diversity, and whether institutions within an early state actually matter. Think of the New Hampshire Institute of Politics, for example. Is that replicable elsewhere? To hear our lineups and let us know who did the best job, head over to gdpolitics.com to catch the whole thing for $8 a month or $80 a year. You'll get twice the number of episodes and will help ensure we can keep making an independent podcast. Again, that's gdpolitics.com. Hope to see you there.